as John said, we were using software, and the whole industry, let's face it, the whole industry was using software that was antiquated. It was developed largely, most of it was developed in the 80s with tweaks that had gone on into the 90s and into the 2000s. But we were addressing a whole different animal. We were having to deal with genomic information, and that really changed the landscape. So when we came to the conclusion that we needed to advance, Bruce was right in the crosshairs. And so, as I said, there's nobody better at converting theory into real world. And so we targeted Bruce. He was then working at Cal Poly as a department head. He agreed to take a sabbatical to develop the software that became known as BOLT. And since that time, he and Dorian Garrett, the other architect in this development, they have formed a company called Theta Solutions. And we are very happy for that development, because initially Bruce was just going to go back to being a department head. And I think Bob Hogue said that very well. Having Bruce as a department head is like having Michelangelo lay bricks. But anyway, no disrespect to department heads, but their administrators are all fine. But anyway, the advancement has been phenomenal. What Bruce and Dorian have been able to do is off the charts. And the fact that now they've developed a sustainable company, with any luck, will ensure that we have advancement, continuous advancement from here on. So with that, I'll pass along to Bruce Golding.
Pointer?
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Right here on the table.
Oh,
Right. Thanks, Wade. Michelangelo. Right. Great. Let me make sure I know how this thing works.
gotta turn it on.
Okay.
Is that attached to that?
Mr. Tacky, he just wants a pointer.
Okay. Which one's pointer? There it is. Great. Hey, thanks, Wade, and thanks everyone for asking me to be here. And thanks, John, especially to John for that talk. That was really nice, John. It was you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants, and John mentioned some of the giants whose shoulders he was standing on. You know, Chuck Henderson and Lush, and he and his cohort Dick Quast are a couple of the giants that we stand on. Specifically, you know, Dorian and I were young graduate students. He was at Cornell working with John and Dick, and I was at Colorado State, and we met each other at, I think it was at a genetic prediction workshop, maybe it was at the IF beforehand, and we instantly realized that working together we'd have a lot of fun, and we could accomplish a lot. And we worked together a lot for the last 30 years, but you know, we really do stand on the shoulders of giants like John and Dick. And we're really grateful for that relationship. John mentioned the NDCEC, and that was such a good collaboration that John just led this team, this wonderful team of researchers that all started working together and collaborating. And it was through his leadership that those sorts of things happened. I want to talk a little bit about Theta and who we are and what we do, just so it's clear to you. And I want to make a point here that really drove home something John said. There's no longer quantitative geneticists at a lot of locations and a lot of universities, and there just aren't the resources out there for lots of reasons to do these kinds of software development efforts, but not just the software, the whole programmatic effort. And then doing this kind of work at research universities, if you have to pay the entire cost, the full cost recovery, you know, with university overhead, and try and access faculty who are spread thinner than ever, it just wouldn't be feasible anymore to do this. And Dorian and I recognized this, and working with Wade, we got this huge opportunity from the Simmental and the other breeds participating, to take this and make it a reality by reimagining how we do it, by privatizing the effort. Now, Dwayne still works, affiliated about 60% of his time with Massey University in a research institution up in Hamilton, but he works, he's a full-time partner in the company, and we've recently brought on his son, Daniel, who completed a PhD in fluid mechanics and aerospace engineering, a brilliant young guy, and we're really excited about the future of the company that he brings, and he's a real good entrepreneur too. So we've got a lot of survivability as Dwayne and I age here. But we really believe that this is the most sustainable way to make these things happen. We're driven to innovate. We're lean and agile. We have a number of customers now, getting larger and larger, that both in the genetic evaluation, genomic evaluation field, but we also expanded our business into genomic data procurement, just managing genomic data for a lot of organizations, which is a task that's easy to underestimate. And then along with that, doing a lot of quality control, a lot of parentage work, that sort of thing. And so our business is expanding and growing rapidly. But I think that helps you understand why we do what we do. Oops, let me do the reveal here. So what I want to talk to you about is why do we change things? John talked a lot about the change that has happened up till now and what we're changing now and what will be changing in the future. And I want to be sure we all understand what the motivation for change is, has been. There's always just one reason to innovate, and there always will be one reason to innovate here. Let's see, I want to talk about how we use the genomic data in our analyses, what the features are of the genomic data, and how we reimagined all the models at the same time. We took advantage of the fact that we were not just incorporating genomic information, but we all sat down and said with Wade and everyone, well, let's look at these models and see if there's new ways, new technologies to better knowledge to achieve what we wanted to achieve. So we've reimagined everything, not just the inclusion of genomic information. And I want to talk to you about the effects. One of the major changes was how we calculate accuracy. It seems pretty straightforward, but I want to talk to you about that because you'll all notice it looks like accuracy dropped. Accuracy didn't drop, accuracy numbers dropped, and I want to talk to you about why. And then just narrow in on new and improved sustained cow fertility, stayability, and carcass traits in particular. But let's make this a conversation as we get toward the end here. If you want me to dig in on a few things, let's just talk about it. All right, so there was this evolution in models. John covered that very well. Going from sire models through to animal models, all the different single trait, multi-trait, threshold, random regression models, and this wouldn't be animal breeding unless we put up the mixed model equations. So there you are. You're looking at it. Well, what drove this evolution? What drove this? Why did we do this change? There's really only one simple reason. And those of you who were at Marty Rock's program yesterday, let everyone else guess. Why? What is driving this change? Why are we including genomic information? Why do we go from sire and dam models to animal models? What do we achieve? What one thing do we achieve that motivates this change? Every piece of innovation improves the accuracy of the prediction. And I mean accuracy in the big sense. The quality of the prediction is improved. And that's what motivates innovation, is what can we do to make these predictions more accurate? Because they are just predictions, right? We're just predicting what the genetic merit of the animals are. And we can only predict it and have some error with it. And every innovation that John talked about that we're doing now improves the accuracy of the predictions. And we're going to show you a little bit about how much the accuracy improved through the genomic information and some of the model changes that we've done. You know, we do have better knowledge of models, but that was only a result of trying to improve the accuracy. We have better methods, but again, those better methods were only a result of this effort to try and improve the accuracy. At the end of the day, we need to reduce as much as possible the prediction error variance of these predictions, how much error they have, okay? And along with that, a lot of this was actually known. John pointed it out. One of their biggest limitations in going to the animal model was they were on the cusp of an evolution in computing technology. You know, we used to run on big iron. I remember the biggest computer I got to work on at Colorado State University was a supercomputer, the Cyber 205, and it had 128 megabytes of memory. Not gigabytes, megabytes of memory. That was as big as this room right here and cost them $40,000 a month to cool. Yeah. Well, things have changed a lot, and there's been this enabling technology. And one of the big enabling technologies that we've got now is very low-cost, high-performance hardware. And so you get this enabling technology, and all of a sudden, you can start looking at new ways to do things. And we've got a great example here of a thing we've known for decades, but we weren't able to do it until we get this enabling technology. Basically, what I'm talking about is gaming computers. Computers that we play video games on, which is a huge industry, right? It's massive. There are contests now. They're proposing having gaming Olympics, and you know, it's worldwide phenomenon. Well, the hardware developed for drawing games in real time on very low-cost computers, desktops, and that hardware is called a graphics processing unit. And the primary graphics processing unit is designed and sold by a company called NVIDIA. Anybody heard of NVIDIA before? Yeah, great company. Yeah, I invested in it when I think it was 35. It's up to 300 something now. They make a card. This one right here is about a $1,200 card. And we plug 4 of those into your computers, and instantly this thing becomes much more powerful than any supercomputer that you have, that we ever had. These things can process at teraflop speeds for very low cost, very low electrical draw. And scientists all over the world in the last decade or more realized that we could do all our scientific computations on something built for games. We just needed to do a little programming, reimagine our programs. Okay, that's one of the big enabling technologies. Now obviously genomic data collection, major enabling technology until organizations like Illumina and GeneSeq and Zoetis could start making this technology perform rapidly at a relatively low cost. We knew we could do these kinds of models. We hadn't completely worked out all the detail. We knew we could include these in analyses, but we needed to have the data. And so we needed to have this wet lab technology involved to create genomic markers. And I'm going to give you a little review of genomic markers. I'm sure Madi will go over this in more detail at his shop. But basically, in the cattle genome, there's about 3 billion what are called base pairs. And base pairs, if you think back to the alpha double helix here, the chromosome, they're just the links that are either a CT or a GA at each base pair. So there's pairs. And then these 2 chromosomes represent the same chromosome sequence, maybe on 2 different animals, let's say, and they might differ at one base pair. This one would be a G and a C here, guanine, cytosine, and this one might be an A and a T, but everything around it would be identical, okay? And that's called a single nucleotide polymorphism. And there's about 6 million of those in the entire cattle genome. 6 million of these locations where one animal might be in one form and then another animal might be in a different form. And all these smart guys in wet labs figured out, well, these are around, some of these are potentially around these 22,000 genes that actually code for something, right? You probably don't know that. The vast majority of your DNA, of DNA in cattle, don't code for anything. They're just sequences of base pairs. They might control folding or other features, but they aren't actual genes. And the vast majority of these SNPs aren't actually within the genes, what are called causals. And in fact, I'll show you some stuff that shows you the vast majority of these SNPs actually aren't associated with anything, only relatively small handfuls of them. Okay, but that's what we're looking at. We're looking at very specific locations where these things change and what their association is then with phenotypes, with performance. We'll look at a little deeper at that. Anyway, a lot of smart guys developed this technology, this bead arrays, these chips where you take that tissue sample and you run it through all that wet lab hardware, and it fluoresces on these dyes, different colors depending upon what base pair it is, at what location. So great enabling technology. And then, along with that, a couple of different analytical techniques were developed. There's acronyms that we call it throughout there. Generally, they fall under the category of a single-step genetic evaluation, and there's 2 prominent models being used there. There's the single-step GBLUP, you'll hear that one, and that's what Angus is using, and a couple other breeds. And Rohan, Fernando, and Dorian, in particular, working with Jack Decker, realized there was another way to think about this that actually adds accuracy, or has the potential to add accuracy beyond just the single-step GBLUP. And we've published some papers on this. It's called, when we dubbed it a couple of different names, a hybrid marker effects model or the super hybrid marker effects model. There's 2 variants on its formulation. And that's what we use in your genetic evaluation, the single-step super hybrid marker effects model. And it includes animals who are genotyped and non-genotyped. And so this is opposed to your previous methods, which was a multi-step where you BLUP and then there's some marker effects and then you blend it all together after the BLUP analysis. This is all done at once for all animals in the pedigree, with or without observations, with or without genotypes. And the animals who are genotyped help the predictions not only for themselves, but for their relatives who may not be genotyped. Okay? So it all works together in a big kind of soup, statistical soup. And your evaluation as of this week, right? These are run weekly now. It starts on Monday night, midnight, Tuesday morning. Steve's automatic, and it's all automatic. Steve's automatic jobs extract the data by 5 or 6 in the morning. The data's all ready. For Lauren's automatic jobs, they automatically pick it up while we're all sleeping and process the data, prep it for the analysis, and that takes a few hours. And once that data's done, it throws it at the analysis, and that takes from about Tuesday afternoon till Friday morning to complete all the traits on, and it runs on 2 different of these low-cost workstations sitting side by side, running different trait combinations on different machines. And it all just kind of happens. Yeah, it really is amazing. It really is. And so I remember Steve said it, He said, I never thought this would actually work. We got it all automated. It's a lot of moving parts, but you know, it's amazingly reliable. And there's a lot of people involved. There's, how many breed associations? I can never get the number, 12 or 13?
12 databases for breed associations.
12 databases from breed associations all come in. They have to be the automated uploads before Monday night to Steve's central system, and he glues them all together automatically while he sleeps. And it really works. It's been working now. Well, this one's been working since March?
We published the end of May.
End of May.
May 5th.
May 5th, right, when we started.
Early May.
Yeah, and we were beta testing beforehand, and it all works. So 12.5 million animals are actually entered the evaluation. There was about 140,000 genotypes this week. I think we're coming in a couple thousand new ones every week. It's multiple traits and run in different trait combinations, and we can talk a little bit about that. Multiple components, so we're talking weaning weight, milk and direct, having these direct and total maternal, that kind of thing, just like before. There's some random regression things going on here. We'll talk a little bit about that. But one thing that we realized, and we'll talk a little more about this too right now, is the markers don't describe all the genetic effects. And that's, you know, we kind of knew that, but it's becoming more and more clear as we look at these things. And so we include in these models not only what the markers can predict for us, but what they can't predict for us, we include as what's called an extra polygenic effect. The other thing we do is we realize, so we start with all different chip densities, and Monty again will talk about that, all different chip densities, and we glue them all together and impute to a common chip density to get this thing started. And that's 50,000 markers. So 50,000 of these SNPs spread across the genome, regardless of how many were actually on the chip. And this imputation process is pretty neat, it's pretty reliable. And then once we got that done, we extract out of that, so 140,000 animals, 50,000 loci, we extract a marker subset. And I want to show you why. We don't use all loci. Because it turns out, as I said before, the vast majority of loci, of SNPs, actually don't have any effect. We cannot associate an effect with the vast majority. Let me show you what I mean. I got a couple of different ways to describe it to you. All right, here is, you can't see this. So at the back is birth weight marker effect. And it's done, it's standardized. So standard deviation units. So -8 to +8 birth weight marker effects along this. So 0 is right there. And this axis is post-weaning gain marker effect, all right? And what we've done out of this, and you can see, we know that birth weight and post-weaning gain are positively correlated. They have a positive correlation. That's unfavorable, right? Because it's antagonistic. We want lighter birth weights down here and higher post-weaning gains up here, all right? Now, each blue dot is the effect of a single marker out of the 50,000 on both post-weaning gain, so that's the post-weaning gain effect of that marker, and the birth weight effect of that marker. And you can see, high post-weaning gain, good, high birth weight, bad, right? Now what this set was this is a 5% of the 50,000 markers, so about 2,500 markers, the best ones. All the other markers not fit in here were all right at 0. 0 and 0 for both traits. So these are the best for either birth weight or post-weaning gain, or both. And best, we have these criteria for deciding what best is. So you can see the vast majority were here. I took them out of this plot because they were uninformative. And in fact, if we include them in the evaluation, they add error. They actually make the accuracy go down a bit. So taking them out and not fitting them maximizes the accuracy. Here's another way to look at it. Here, so we took that same set of 2,500 markers and said, well, really, we had a lot of markers that really had a pretty low probability of having an effect. They were higher than all the zero markers, the 50,000 other zero markers. But here are the ones who are absolutely positive have an effect. Now, what I want you to notice is the genetic correlation between birth weight and post-weaning gain is high, but it's not 1. They aren't the same trait. And what that means is, well, there are a lot of markers having an effect on both traits, and that's this line right through here. There are more markers having an effect on only one trait, but not the other. Okay? So any marker that's on the 0 line for post-weaning gain, but is on a non-zero position for birth weight, has an effect on birth weight, but not post-weaning gain. And same thing on the vertical axis. So these markers that are on this diagonal, we call those Pleat Atrophic. They have an effect on the 2 traits. A lot of markers have an effect on only one or the other. But this is only a subset. The vast majority of those 50,000, we just said there's no effect we can associate with them. Let's look at that another way. And all this kind of starts to make sense to geneticists, I think, as we look at these things. Here's another way to look at it, and this is a different trait from a different data set. That last one was the Simmental, the Simmental data set. This is a different way. So this top, let's look at the top graph first. This is the marker effect, and each one of these is a chromosome. That's chromosome 1, 2, 3, up to 29 here. And each one of these, so this is a different data set. This is 120,000 markers. So there's actually 120,000 dots in here. And you can see the vast majority of dots, so across these 120,000 markers, are right here around 0. They have no effect. We cannot find any effect on this trait due to these markers. But up here, there's still quite a few markers that are associated with an effect on this trait. So that's a subset of markers out of 120,000 that we can identify have an effect on the trait. So here's the effect, chromosome. This plot says on the vertical axis, it's the same thing, the marker's on the horizontal axis, but on the vertical axis, that's the probability of having an effect. So you can see that this marker here has this effect on this trait, and it's almost a 90% probability that it is true. Okay, and this is a much smaller data set. The probabilities for your data, because of the 140,000 genotyped animals, all get up here into the ones. But you can see the vast majority of markers out of 120,000 different ones have a very low probability of having an effect. And if you try to include all those in an analysis, you actually drop the accuracy. Okay, so we go through a process called marker selection. We do these Bayes C things that go out there and calculate these probabilities over and over and over again. And then from those pre-analyses, we put together marker subsets that we then actually include in these analyses. Okay, does that make sense why we're doing marker subsets? We aren't using all 50,000 of these things. That's something I think that a lot of people are kind of scratching their head over is, well, why don't you use them all? The vast majority do not have an effect. Okay. Now, I mentioned this earlier. So we've realized too that there is this effect that we can associate with the markers. We call it a genomic effect. And mathematically we say it's M alpha. M alpha. Animal breeding. And then there's this extra polygenic effect that is not associated with any markers yet. And as the markers get better and better, we'll be able to capture more of this with functional markers. And markers are evolving, and that will increase the accuracy of the EPDs as these get better and better. And there's a lot of work going on looking for better marker subsets. And so an EPD is a function of the stuff we can describe with markers, this M alpha, this genomic effect, plus the extra polygenic effect. So it's 2 pieces. And so when it, sometimes you'll see a bull, he has not yet been genotyped, and he'll have an EPD, and then you genotype him, and then EPD will jump without any other data sources. It'll move. And that's because the marker effect says, oh, we didn't have it quite right. Okay, another way to look at the accuracy issue. What I've done here is I've taken birth weight from one version of the Simmental evaluation, and I did a traditional block, no genomic data. And on the vertical axis here is the prediction error variance. And so that's how we calculate accuracy. We take the prediction error variance and do some math and accuracy. If accuracy is high, the prediction error variance is low. Okay, that means there's a small error variance. If accuracy is low, the prediction error variance is high. So think of this side of the plot is the accuracy of a traditional blot divided into 10 different groups, right? For the genotyped animals who were, remember the blot didn't consider the genomic information. And over here are the very high accuracy animals in a blot, and their prediction error variance is low. And over here are the very lowest accuracy animals, think yearling bulls, think newborn calves, think pedigree estimates. Their prediction error variance is high. The top line then is the accuracy of blood, okay, for these animals, this group of animals. And you can see the prediction error variance is highest for blood, which makes sense. Now, we take, and if we did a type of analysis that includes all genomic data, all marker data, that's this one. We get a nice little bump in accuracy. In other words, the prediction error variance drops for a single step G-BLUB or a base C0 or whatever you want to call it. Using all markers, get a little accuracy bump. But if you do it with the...
Which breed, I want to stop you, Bruce. Which breed would do that middle one?
I don't know. Come on, don't do me in trouble. Dave's sitting right behind you. I'm already in trouble with him. And so you get a nice bump in accuracy that way. But if you do this marker selection stuff, and you select out, you know, with the marker selection models, only the markers that have an effect, you get even a better bump. Prediction error variance goes down, accuracy goes up. And we'll show you a little bit about how much accuracy goes up.
Wow.
Okay, so that's this evolution of technologies, right? We go blah, that level of accuracy, super hybrid model, that level of accuracy. New technology drives accuracy. What's this mean in terms of progeny equivalents? Marty put this together. Marty Saki put this together for us. And it's just an empirical evaluation of how, if you were a yearling bull and you didn't have any genomic data, and then you did, so you had an accuracy if you didn't have genomic data, and then if a yearling bull did have genomic data, how many progeny would that yearling bull have had to get that accuracy that the genomic data provides, right? In other words, yearling bull, if you genotype him, it's equivalent to how many progeny would he have to have. And these are the different traits: Cavigny's maternal, birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, milk, stayability, carcass weight, marbling, ribeye area, fat, and docility. You'll notice these are the numbers of progeny equivalents. And they aren't all the same for several different reasons. Some of the reasons are a little complex. But it's basically how heritable is the trait, how is it being modeled, and then how many animals with a phenotype for that trait have an observation. That makes a big difference, and especially in these carcass traits, you know, they're relatively highly heritable, but there's not many observations directly on carcass, and not many of them are genotyped. And as we get more genotypes with carcass phenotypes, I anticipate these numbers will go up quite a bit. All these numbers will go up quite a bit as we do that. Okay, so that's kind of a neat table. I hope you've seen that in the publications. And I said we reimagined the models, and as we went along here, We looked at how to change how breed year and grouping effects are done to you know, make things behave better. We were having issues early on and trying to get them to behave. You know, we include two-breed heterosis outcrossing equations, and we don't actually include two-breed type equations. We cluster them, but we account for heterosis. Contemporary group, same kind of thing. I don't think we changed much in most traits in contemporary group. Maybe a little bit in red Angus stability. We had a couple of fancy equations here that talk about the difference in genetic merit between genotyped and non-genotyped animals, so we can account for that, right? Because you tend to genotype, at least early on we were tending to genotype only the superior animals. And then some other equations that go into these evaluations. All right, and along with this, so we have this great enabling hardware. This gaming hardware came along that could really make these computations fly. We went from doing a growth evaluation took 24 hours on the longer on the Cornell, 50 hours on the Cornell software. We could do that same evaluation in it was under an hour, I think, 45 minutes or something. Just this enabling hardware, that's all it was. It was nothing wrong with the old software. But we looked at that and we said, well, we don't want to, we got a whole week, right? Yeah, we could do it daily, right, hourly. We said, how can we use that time? How can we better leverage that hardware to improve other things? And one of the things we realized was accuracy. Accuracy has always been actually much harder to get than the EPDs themselves. Accuracy is used to require, you know, inversion of huge matrices that were just intractable. They're just a really hard computation. But we looked at it and we said, there's another way to calculate this prediction error variance that goes into accuracy. And everyone's known about it for a long time, and we've always done it on smaller sets. And it's through something called sampling, or specifically Monte Carlo Markov chain or Gibbs sampling. I know Bob's looking at me going, Bruce, you promised not to use those words. So we do these sampling things, and what we do is we sample over and over and over, and we throw a random number at the EPDs and sample them again and say, well, what happens at each one of these samples to all the other EPDs and how do they move? And the math shows us that if we do this, and we do this enough, we get a non-approximated prediction error variance. We get an estimate of prediction error variance that doesn't have the bias that our approximation techniques have. And you know, they were biased, and I'll show you a little bit how biased they were. And everyone does it, or did it. It wasn't just us. It wasn't, you know, there was some great work done by Cornell that I derived our methods at Colorado State from. It was by Sarah Greenlaw and you know, and a lot of other people. The ABRI people had a version of that. Bruce Tier and Karen Meyer developed a version of that. And everyone approximated. Well, we always knew these were biased. We knew they were pretty good for the high accuracy animals, and we always knew that they weren't great for the low accuracy animals, especially for traits where you were relying on the correlated trait information, the indicator trait information, to calculate the accuracy for the economically relevant trait. Think specifically carcass traits. Had a lot of ultrasound data, not much carcass data. The approximation bias was worse in those kinds of situations. But now we said, well, let's take this computer time and use this sampling method. Can we come up with a sampling method that allows us to sample these things 50,000 times in a reasonable amount of time? And so in this 4 days of the computers running to get your EPDs, 80% of that is just calculating accuracy. But what's that do for us? Well, here's an example from ABRI data. This trait is marbling score accuracy for a group of published sires. And this is the accuracy on this axis for those sires that came from their Pan-Am evaluation, from ABRI's regular BLUP evaluation for marbling score. And remember, this is the worst case because, you know, it was being estimated, approximated from mostly ultrasound data. The red line then is the true value, or if they agreed. And so here's what ABRI had for accuracy, and here's what the Bolt method, using, actually, and this is using the marker effects model, so it's a little bit skewed because it has genomic data in it. The problem's actually worse if you just did blup to blup. And you can see this, everything skewed over here means they were biased to have too high an accuracy in the old evaluation compared to the new evaluation. And so, right there, you realize that we've improved the accuracy computation, and the accuracies all went down. But that's because we overestimated the accuracy with our previous approximation methods. And so, I don't want anyone to think that, oh no, our evaluation is less accurate. Your evaluation is more accurate, and your accuracy computation is more accurate. Okay? And that concerns a lot of people, but everyone seems to be getting used to it, right? Yeah. Yeah. They will. Accuracy is incredibly important. The other thing we can do now with this sampling method, so accuracy is a kind of a goofy number, this 0 to 1 number. It's really the accuracy, any one bull's accuracy. John, help me out here. It's the difference between that bull and the population mean, or something called 0. As opposed to when you make a decision between two bulls, you really want to know what the accuracy is of the decision between these alternatives. And the number that you get, the 0 to 1, really isn't that number. But with these sampling methods now, we can actually get that, or the accuracy difference between whole collections of bulls. What if I bought this guy's bulls versus this guy's? Which one of those collections is more accurate? We can do things like that now with this sampling method. Did I sort of fumble that? Yeah. Okay. So that we felt that was a big innovation, that accuracy now is more accurate. Again, we completely reimagined all the models, but specifically for stayability, we reimagined it. And I'll look at that here in a second in more detail. In carcass traits, we looked at that, and your previous evaluation was ultrasound marbling with carcass trait marbling, and you had very few carcass trait marbling stores. So virtually the EPDs were ultrasound EPDs. I mean, they virtually were. Or same with ribeye area. There was ultrasound ribeye area with carcass ribeye area. Only those two in pairs. They were basically ultrasound ribeye area EPDs. Well, we looked at it and said, let's make these true multi-trait evaluations. So we took the muscle traits and grouped them together. We took the fat traits and grouped them together. And then the muscle traits, we added, so carcass weight, ribeye area, and then their ultrasound equivalents. We added weaning weight and post-weaning gain, or yearling weight, in that, to mostly to enhance the carcass weight predictions. And so it's a much more sophisticated evaluation. We included genomic information in it. But the problem with carcass traits, so Lauren did this, Lauren Hyde looked at the connectivity of the 12 breeds among growth traits. And we analyzed it and everyone looked at it, and we definitely had really good connectivity between these traits. Our breed comparisons that we got out of that, actually we looked at those compared to clay center, and they weren't that different. We liked ours better. And so we said, don't need to do anything with it. But we were having trouble with the carcass traits at the same time. We were looking at that saying, some of this doesn't make sense. Some of the breeds just aren't coming out intuitively or anywhere near what clay center says. And we were thinking limousine. Limousine just kind of came up to the middle, right around 0. They weren't bad on marbling, they weren't great on marbling, they weren't everything about limousine just looked very average, for example. And the other breeds didn't quite make sense. And so Lauren did the same connectivity analysis on the carcass data, and we realized there wasn't much connectivity in the carcass data. There was a common thread, some Angus in there, but for example, limousine, most of the Angus came out of females that we didn't know anything about. We realized we had real connectivity issues, and we tried to solve it several different ways, and we finally came up, just for carcass traits, with a solution that said, we're going to make them be the clay center differences, because that's the best we know. There's no better source that we know of right now for how the breed impacts carcass EPDs. And so we run the EPDs, we do the analysis, and we look at them, and then through the simultaneous solution that we worked out with Larry and Mark and Warren at Clay Center, a method then so that our contrasts come up exactly the same as their contrasts for breeds, for breed of sire differences, and then over time. And we think that method is good. We'd love to have better connectivity, and over time, we probably will have better connectivity, but we think that's a good, solid method. Okay? Clear on that? So we had to do that on carcass traits. In Catanese, we reimagined it. We changed from a threshold model, particularly because I used to be the big advocate, one of the big advocates, everyone was, for threshold modeling. Number one, threshold modeling is pretty hard to do in these genomic effects models. So we looked at it and said, do we really need to do it? And then we started realizing that in threshold models, you have to throw out contemporary groups with no variation, okay? They just don't work if a contemporary group is all ones. And there was a lot of data there. And we realized, and we're going to come back to that for stability too, we realized that those no variation groups were telling us something. If two sires were represented in lots of groups that everything was one, well, that told us something about the sires. And by throwing that out, we have only groups where the sires weren't ones, and that biased the numbers, potentially. And there's some literature that says a linear model is sometimes even better than a threshold model under the same data circumstances. So we said, we're going back to a strict linear model. We tried a random regression there, and it just, we couldn't get it to behave well, I think because of the diversity of breeds. And so that was the major change in Catanese, also including genomic data. All right, let's go back to stability. I got predictions of cow productivity here. There are lots of them, and Warren Snelling's doing some neat work right now. I encourage you to look for it on additional additions to ways to look at cow productivity, lifetime productivity. You'll recall that Warren was working on his PhD with me, was the guy who pioneered the original stability, which has evolved a lot under a lot of different people, Dorian and others, doing additional research on it to figure out ways to include data at all ages of cow. But then a guy named Yamarazik, working with the Canadian Simmental Association, developed a technique based on a random regression approach where he could use the stability or the observation of a cow having a calf or not having a calf at all ages, driving a regression through that to consider all data at all ages simultaneously, where everything else up until that point was, if it was considering data at different ages besides just 6, it was doing it in this kind of ad hoc fashion that had certain problems, certain issues. And he showed that this was better than a threshold model and better than what are called, these time to failure models or failure models. And it also allowed us to use, so you've always had to throw out no variation contemporary groups and stability, allows us to use that data. It allows us to use missing observations much more sensibly. If a cow, for example, gets flushed and held back a year, she doesn't get penalized. It isn't a zero, it isn't a success, it's an unknown. So it has no negative impact on her. So it allows things like that. This new approach allows us to use that data a whole lot more sensibly and more powerfully. And I really like that random regression approach. It's important because, as you have seen, stability in a maternal index drives a large part of that index. And so it's important to get this right, and we do it by taking these 0, cow did not have a calf, 1, cow had a calf at a given age, or unknown if the cow had a calf at a different age, and driving a regression through it for each animal. Okay? And that regression, then, we create the EPD out of. And we actually do the regression for both extrapolygenic effects and marker effects at the same time, separate regressions. So it uses observations in a more sensible way, handles sensible missing values in a more sensible way. It's easy to implement in these animal models and easy to implement in a genomic model, much easier than threshold models. Faster to obtain answers, both with the solvers, we can solve these things pretty quickly, and we can sample these things pretty quickly to get the accuracies, get high quality accuracy estimates. The Jamrozik's research showed it's often better than the previous threshold model procedures. And we can actually use that to make a prediction then at any age, not just at age 6. Age 6 is still a good standard. I know the Herefords took the same approach and called it sustained cow fertility and are projecting out to 12 years of age, but it's the same prediction, basically. Let's see. In that model, we also consider all kinds of other effects. I just wanted, for completeness, to have this here. The year of birth, the age of first calf. We call contemporary group here random. That's a statistical thing. And we fit a regression on both an intercept and slope term on the contemporary group. Permanent environment due to the dam, same thing, random regression on that. And marker effects, intercept and slope for both genotyped and non-genotyped animals. Extra polygenic effects. And we include additive genetic groups the same way we do in all the models. Okay, so that was the big change in stability, and we think it's a major step forward, and that was a really good piece of research done out of Canada that drove that. Let's see. So Marty, then the group asked, so we have this big group, and Matt Spangler, who I want to give a shout out to here, drives this group. He makes us get on the phone every week. He makes sure people are getting their jobs done, the data's coming in, and this is a big group. This is all these breed associations, some academics, and some technical people, all on these calls every week. And one of the things that we asked Marty to do was tell us, well, what kind of improvement have we made? We saw the numbers, we know the progeny equivalents now for yearling bulls, but what kind of improvement have we made in the EPDs? And so he took a group of sires for birth weight, weaning weight, yearling weight, and they were non-genotype sires, right, Monty? Right? Yeah, non-genotype sires. And he said, what is the correlation of their EPDs to their progeny's performance for the Bolt evaluation and the Cornell evaluation? So with all these changes that we've made, what is the correlation? And some of these are 50% higher correlations. Ranges from 25% better to 50% better correlations in these predictions. So that was pretty compelling that we were improving things. So the traits we are producing now, I don't think I've left anything off. All the usual gross stuff, and I'm with John. Rip the Band-Aid off, guys, get rid of birth weight. I know. Total maternal, calving ease. Now remember, calving ease has always been calving ease total maternal. Everyone forgot that over the decades. I remember starting on the Hereford evaluation, I'm not picking on them, And I asked them, guys, your existing cavities maternal, is that total maternal or maternal? And they didn't know. So called ABRI, asked them the same question. They said, we don't know. They had to go back into the code. They had lost, all of us had lost so much corporate knowledge or legacy knowledge. They had to go back into the code and verify, yeah, it's total maternal, right? It's not cavities maternal only. Carcass weight, ribeye area, marbling, square fat thickness, yield grade. I got it in brackets here because that's post hoc. Stability, docility. Okay. What don't you have? Heifer pregnancy, exploring that one. The team is exploring that one right now, gathering all the data from the different breed associations. And we're starting to find issues with that different breed associations collected different kinds of data on that and trying to figure out the best way to utilize that. It's going to be a major effort. Dry matter intake, we just got dry matter intake data from, I think, everyone now. Gelpi just gave permission to release theirs. That's excellent. We'll get that one out there. But one we're really excited about is we want to build on some of the work that's already been done on days to finish, time to finish, that sort of thing. It's this idea that if we can get a lot of medium quality kinds of data, time to finish, we can improve the accuracy potentially of total intake beyond just having a few or a relatively small amount of high quality data, and that would be like feed consumption data itself. So we're working on that. And then I know some people have started talking about some health traits. We haven't put that on the agenda yet. What else? I don't remember what else. Anyway, that's where we're at. Do I do Q&A now?
Yep.
Questions? No questions, good. Oh, one in the back here. Wait.
John Hall. I want to recognize John Hall. Dr. John Hall is someone that he runs an experiment station in the middle of nowhere, Salmon, Idaho. And we've been working with him for a long time, and he's brought a lot to the table.
So, Bruce, this is a question on heifer pregnancy, and I know some of the things you're trying to do with that. And of course, this is one of those questions that scares us all because we start thinking about what kind of indicator traits do you think we're going to need to be looking at for heifer pregnancy?
That's a good question. Obviously, scrotal circumference has the ability to provide that some help on, because heifer pregnancy differs from stability in a lot of different ways, but puberty is one of the factors impacting it, and scrotal circumference has the potential to tell us something about puberty. Unfortunately, and probably on a large part to blame, people kind of stopped taking a lot of scrotal circumference data. We don't have a lot of it. Heifer pregnancy, really, the data that we need is direct observations on, ideally, AI date went to bull, date breeding season stopped, that sort of thing. And then complete observations. Was an animal exposed or not?
But Bruce, isn't it fair to say, when you actually, I think you were still at CSU when you were developing the heifer preg EPD there, and you looked at the relationship between heifer preg and scrotal circumference, and if I recall, there wasn't a lot there. Is that right?
Wasn't a lot, but there was some. I was trying to address this question about indicator traits. There's probably not much else.
Yeah. Actually, if you remember back, it was confounded because some of the larger. If you remember back, we had a confounded problem because some of the larger scrotal circumference was because they reached puberty earlier, and some of them because they were just bigger bulls, higher growth bulls. And it was really hard to sort those two things out on which was affecting.
Good on you. You remember that better than I do.
Put up a trap.
We did. Bob and I, he helped us pioneer that in Red Angus, and that was one of the first breeds, I think, to release a heifer pregnancy. More questions? Well, thanks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for working with us.
Okay, we've got a book for you, Bruce. You're in there.
Did Bob sign it?
Bob will sign it. He said free of charge, I think.
It's already signed.
Oh, it's already signed.
Great. Thank you, Wade.
Thanks a lot.